press and record.
Okay, thank you so much, Jen. That was a great introduction. I'm Elizabeth Schandelmeier, and I'm really, really pleased to be here tonight. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Um, as Jen mentioned, I was on the palliative team at Presby and currently serve as a bereavement coordinator and counselor for family hospice, which is also part of UPMC. So I like to disclose that affiliation, although I do not bring that affiliation to this discussion. But I do work with families before a death as well as the bereaved afterwards. And then I have a very, very small private practice where I focus exclusively on grief and loss and death and dying. And so this has been a topic that has come up over the years for me, especially working with the folks with malignant brain tumors. And it's an area that I think has not had enough discussion. I think it's complex, and so I'm really happy to be here. I was telling Jen that I'm gonna move through my slides fairly quickly. I was so appreciative to get the wonderful questions that you guys sent. That really let me know that you have some pretty heavy topics on your mind. So I wanted to make sure that I am sort of meeting you at the level that you would like for me to speak to. And because of that, I'm going to move through the presentation's pretty dense. But I'm hoping to leave enough time at the end so that everybody has as much time as they would like to have to be able to ask questions or to discuss. And if there's any slides that anybody would like to move back to, please just let me know. I can't see the chat or the questions, so I'm going to let Jen be in charge of that. And here we go. So, it's interesting to me that there's so many folks who are sort of moving through this space of chronic illness, and there's very, very little research about the experience that everybody is having. When I look things up, and I say a quick literature search, I'm not an academic, so there could be deeper dives into this. And I know that things have been written, but for the most part, there's very little investigation into this sort of area of time between diagnosis and, while people are living with the diagnosis that they have. Most of the stuff that I found was really about the caregivers, and who are very important. I'm glad that that research exists. But when it came to the patients, it was mostly about the impact of stress on tumor growth. And frankly, that sounded like very stressful information to have to read about. Or the impact of your medical team on how they stress you out. And I thought, well, you probably already know all about that. I only found one study that discussed the sort of shared stress levels between the caregiver and the patient. And it was really interesting to me that they found it was about a 50-50 split. And a lot of people find that very, very surprising. Most of the folks who are going through treatment, and even the caregivers themselves, they underestimate the amount of stress that the other is experiencing. But that's just one small study, and there needs to be more. There is some literature being developed, really just starting in about 2022, looking at the impact of long-term treatment for chronic illness and the emotional stressors that come with that. And hopefully we'll be doing more of that. It's mostly, as far as I can tell, from a nursing perspective. So we'll see what keeps happening. I'm hoping to sort of push that dial a little bit. But as far as I'm concerned, if there's a lot of research out there, it shouldn't be hard to find. It should be stuff that we can all locate. So this idea of cancer as a chronic illness, I don't know how old we all are, but I suspect many of us can remember a time when it was, something that we didn't talk about. Cancer was, the big C word.
For sure.
And it was sort of immediately assumed that cancer would be, very quickly terminal. But our medical technology and treatment has advanced so rapidly over the past 10, 15 years that that's just really not true anymore for many, many types of cancer. So it's really a totally different world out there, a totally different dialogue. And it's great that our medical advances have improved so much, but I'm not so sure that our social and emotional support for folks who are now living with a cancer diagnosis and often having to pursue treatment over a number of years. I'm not sure that we understand how to support folks who are going through that experience. And there tends to be this sort of emphasis on feeling, sort of lucky that you're still alive, and a focus on gratitude rather than really sort of stepping back and thinking about what are some of the changes that are going on in your lives. And sure, we can have lots of gratitude for that, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. So, what can we do to better support folks who are in this space? There's lots of self-judgment and blame depending on, different types of cancers. Um, the optimism, the people around us, they want us to, fight and have a great attitude. But sometimes the reality of it is that there's things that you're going through that are really hard or really scary. And that's real. And it's important for people to be able to talk about that without feeling like they're not being optimistic, right? So optimism and realism can exist in the same space. And I don't think that being realistic is the same as being pessimistic. I think realistic is addressing the challenges. Cancer treatment is not easy. There's lots of things about it that have very real impacts on people's lives, and it's important to recognize that, in my opinion. Receiving a cancer diagnosis often makes us challenge our assumptions about who we are in the world, sort of going about our business one day, and the next thing we know, the rug has been pulled out from underneath us. And the prospects of treatment and long-term medical care that can really make the ground underneath you feel pretty shaky, not knowing what to expect and not knowing what the future holds. That can produce a lot of anxiety. It can also help us shift our priorities. I know this is one of the comments that came to me, a feeling of gratitude, and also just not really having a lot of patience for other people's really kind of trivial and petty issues that they grump about when you're dealing yourself with sort of life and death matters. So your priorities, wanting to enjoy life to the fullest, might be in conflict with the people around you who may or may not have time or perspective to sort of walk that path with you in that way. We forget that grief and gratitude can exist in the same space. We can be really grateful for the time that we have at the same time that we are really disappointed that this has happened to us. So then we also want to talk about the types of loss. There's death losses and non-death losses. And the reason I want to talk about that is because so often when we use the word grief, we think about death, but that's not always the case. And it's a part of this lack of vocabulary that we have to talk about the experience that people are moving through. There's lots of non-death losses that we think about, whether it's during the pandemic, for example, our inability to socialize, or, maybe not being able to go to work in the same way that we used to, or have our friendship groups, or you can even think of things like divorce. But I do think that the non losses of living with chronic illness are a little bit different even than those. Typically, the difference between a death loss and a non-death loss is that a death loss is permanent. But the truth of the matter is, when you're moving through cancer treatment, and the changes that can happen in your own life are also permanent, actually. And so in that sense, I think that grief is a very appropriate word there, even though it might seem a little scary. So let's see, yeah, the primary permanent losses and shifts in your identity. A lot of times there's sort of, who you are until diagnosis. And then no matter, sort of what the diagnosis is or what the prognosis is, any moment after that diagnosis, sort of marks the beginning of a new life in a different kind of way. And then the folks around us, they don't always know how to support. They don't always know what to say or what to do. And then everything being so unpredictable, means that we have to be flexible with our life in ways that maybe we weren't. And all of a sudden we feel different than everybody. The losses, they're not secondary or ambiguous. They're right there with you. And so I've come up with a concept that I think about, and that is this idea of something that I call twilight grief. And it's different from anticipatory or preparatory grief. Anticipatory grief is when folks are anticipating, when family circles of support are anticipating a death, and preparatory is when a person is preparing for their own death. But that's not what twilight grief is all about. As a matter of fact, in my perspective, twilight grief is actually all about living and being as fully alive as we can be in this time when our life is changing and there's a lot of challenges. But again, the focus is on living, not so much on looking to the end of life. So I define this, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. I didn't come up with this just for this talk, which I hope helps you all feel like the experience that you're having is not. I don't want to say it's not unique to you in the sense that it's your own experience, but you're not alone, is really what I'm trying to say. So it's this period of long-term medical management and change, between diagnosis and through treatment. Limited social supports, care partner fatigue, guilt, frustration, relationships are changing, your identity is changing. Maybe hard to figure out how to communicate with people about this. All kinds of changes that are happening in life. And it can feel, overwhelming and melancholy and unfair. But there's also usually lots of moments that are really sparkling, just as in Twilight. Twilight's a really beautiful and unique part of the day, and it's gorgeous in its own specialness. So the kinds of losses that people often report to me that they're experiencing during this period, have to do with all of the changes that can happen in life, that it may be difficult to, return to work in the same capacity. So your financial independence, your friends don't quite know how to support you. It might impact your career or your ability to be out and about. Your immune system may be compromised. Your body may be changing in ways that are uncomfortable for you, or maybe that are, uncomfortable emotionally, but also maybe even physically. And so, your physical touch, human beings need physical touch. We don't always talk about that in intimacy, but that's a really important part of being a person, and how that changes what feels good, what doesn't feel good. That can be a big shift for folks. Control of your life, your relationships, your physical health, all of the things that you need, your emotional health, your sense of who you are, and even just things like your hobbies, the things that you used to just enjoy doing just for fun, may or may not be easy for you to continue to do through this time as you change. And I always like just to remind people that with grief, and even with twilight grief, there's physical symptoms, and you'll notice that a lot of these are probably also some of the symptoms that you might experience in the treatment that you're receiving. So it's not always easy to sort of untangle, what's a part of the disease, or what's a part of the treatment, or what's a part of just your the grieving process, the way it impacts the way we're able to think, the fogginess and confusion, and added to chemo brain and other kinds of stressors in life. It's kind of like a crisis reaction. So it can really change our ability to feel competent, but it is not actually a change in your competence. It's just it's an emotional reaction to stress. Behavioral reactions social withdrawal, hyperactivity, irritability. These are all things that are very, very common with a grief response. But they also make it kind of hard for us to manage our social relationships. You know, this is sort of a list of all the reasons you might not want to go to a holiday party, for example. And so people around you are often confused about why you may or may not want to be out in the world the way you used to be. And part of it may be because of some of the grief that you're experiencing. You know, grief really hits us at the time when we need to be our best. And, you know, other than recognizing that this is a part of what's happening with you, you know, there's not a ton that we can do about it other than developing some awareness about our own situation and understanding why the things that we're going through are making it even more difficult to kind of make good decisions for ourselves or think clearly about what we need to about these really important decisions that are in front of us. Change. Yeah, it's all about change. Grief, loss. It's really about the changes that happen in our life. And some people are more comfortable with change than others. So in thinking about, you know, your own identity, this whole idea of who am I, you know, we get to a certain part of our life where we feel like we've kind of figured ourselves out finally, and we receive a diagnosis, and it can really shift that understanding of, you know, who you are at a fundamental level, and that can be very, very disorienting. So the sort of stigma of a cancer diagnosis, this idea of being less than, I want to spend a minute on that because so often folks, when we have either physical or cognitive changes or emotional changes due to a diagnosis, people tend to compare themselves to the person that they used to be. And I think that's really unfortunate because typically we then start to define ourselves in the negative, right? I used to be a person who could do this. I used to be a person who could do that. Or I used to look this way and that was attractive. And now I look this way and I'm not sure that it is. And I think that really leads people to be very, very, very hard on themselves. And it makes it very difficult to begin to understand what the changes in your life add actually to who you are in the world. I'm not talking new and improved. I don't tend to use relative terms like that, better, worse, forward, backwards, because it's chaos, as one of the other slides was showing. It's really just about being able to also appreciate that some of the changes that you're going through don't necessarily make you a less than version of who you are. They, you know, they're bringing you wisdom. You know things that other people don't know now, and you're, you know, you may be better suited for being in the world that you're in, given the changes that you're going through. So, you know, we don't have to think of it as being less than, worse than, I wish I was, as okay, this is who I'm becoming. I'm shifting, I'm changing, and I'm becoming somebody a little bit different than who I was. And maybe, you know, maybe there's some good things in there too. This heightened emotional sensitivity, people don't like to hear about this because, you know, I tell people that people who are grieving are sometimes pretty irritable. And that's okay. It's a part of it, but I think it's really helpful to remind ourselves of that our patience may be low, our tolerance for other people's and our irritability. Part of that we have to sort of own because it has a real impact on the relationships that we're trying to save that may, you know, maybe having some difficulties to begin with. And then if we're sort of holding everybody to a certain standard that they can't meet, we wind up sometimes filtering out friendships that are otherwise actually pretty important in our life. You know, your physical needs and your physical self, the capacity, how much you can think, how many decisions you can make for yourself, your own autonomy, your perception of who you feel like you are versus who other people think that you are, or other people think that you're becoming. And do you have the are people allowing you to lead that for yourself, right? You still know who you are, but other people might like to have, let you take charge of some of that direction. But then we also ask, okay, I'm going through all these changes. Where's everybody else? Where's my friends? Somebody did ask specifically, they said that their friends had sort of disappeared after about 4 months. Is that normal? And I'm sorry to say that, yeah, actually it is kind of normal, between 4 and 6 months. But just because it's normal doesn't mean it's fair. It doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's rational. It doesn't mean it's good. It just is something that actually is pretty common, unfortunately. So, not, and I guess part of the reason I like to address that is that so you don't take it so personally. This is pretty much across the board. Anybody who has folks who stick around a lot longer than that, consider yourselves lucky. And it's something that these are relationships that need to be cultivated, actually, oftentimes, which is also not really fair. But there's not really anything fair about a cancer diagnosis to begin with. So maybe that's not too much of a surprise. Why do people disappear? Well, maybe a lack of understanding, maybe they can't relate. Usually it's this kind of empathy, fear, inability to cope. Usually it has more to do with that they just don't know what to do or how to help, and they feel helpless and they don't like that feeling. And so it's easier to sort of step back. But also, people have busy lives, and sometimes it's just hard for them to know how to make time. And most folks that I know are not great at asking for help. So if you don't ask for help, it's easy for other people to pretend like you don't need any. So when we're thinking about where did people disappear to, we also just have to think a little bit about, how other people sort of live their lives and relate to the medical system, or the ideas of illness. A lot of that can be sort of cultural stuff. Some people, will turn to their faith leaders, their pastor, or their priest, or imam, or whoever it might be. Some people, feel like, okay, it's time to start making casseroles. I'm going to come fill your freezer. Some people have a lot of access to resources. Some people don't. There's norms on how to express grief. Some people are stoic and some people are emotional. Some people know that they do nothing but cry. So even though that's normal for them, they don't want to come over and make you sad. The stoic ones are the ones that'll come and basically talk to you about just about anything other than what you're actually going through. So this outward expression may differ from internal experience. I hope folks will keep that in mind a little bit, because just, we never quite know what's going on inside of somebody else unless we're really talking to them about it. And so we can assume that other people are staying away for reasons that, we don't appreciate, but we don't really know what's going on with them. So how do you solve that? Communication. And more communication and more communication. This is the time to develop your communication skills as much as you possibly can, and probably in the most uncomfortable ways that you have experienced in your life, because this is the time when you're going to have to learn how to tell people what you want, and advocate for yourself, and tell people what you need, and do all the things that we don't ever like to have to talk to other people about, the things that we're going through, maybe being a little bit vulnerable, maybe sort of letting people into a space that we typically didn't, want to have anybody in. And so a lot of these conversations are uncomfortable, but they're really necessary, because without these conversations, people just will not know what you're going through, and they will not know what you need, and they won't be able to guess, and they won't be able to read your mind. And so you need to help them. You need to help them help you. This use of and rather than but. This is that grief and gratitude coexisting. We can say, yeah, I am really glad that, the doctor thinks that I've got, good long years to live. And I'm really sad that I have to go through cancer treatment. This really is terrible. Both of those things are true. And so teaching ourselves to use that word and gives us permission to acknowledge how complicated the experience is. The things that you guys are going through, it's not simple at all. It's not just one feeling, it's not just one thing, it's all of the feelings and all of the things. So giving yourself permission to use that language and sharing that with other people, because other people may want to try to cheer you up. People forget that, cancer diagnosis is bad news, and it's not really something to be cheered up from. There might be moments where they can bring happiness and laughter and joy to your life, but you are going through something hard, and that's real. So defining your own normal, what is it that you think normal can or should look like in your own life? There was a person who asked about their own self-advocacy, that people were sort of walking in and wanting to make decisions for them, and felt that they were no longer competent to take care of themselves just because they have a cancer diagnosis. And I can really understand why that might be incredibly frustrating. I will say that the role of safety, that is always primary. So that can't be ignored. But just because you have a cancer diagnosis does not mean you can no longer make decisions for yourself. And this might be a really good time to sit down and have a very frank discussion with whoever it is that's trying to take those decisions away from you, and really let them know. And if you have to, sometimes it might involve the doctor, for example, or even making some bargains. For example, if they're worried about you falling, well, it might be a good idea to get a life alert button, or one of those watches, a smart watch that has some of them have sensors to detect falls. There's lots of different kinds of solutions. So sometimes it's really just about finding out what is it exactly that they're concerned about. And usually, I mean, they love you, they want you to be safe. So if there are compromises that you can make, maybe the area agency on aging can come and do a free check in your house to make sure that that your house is set up in a way that's safe. They'll come and just take a look around and make recommendations. Maybe something like that would help your relatives or whoever it is that's trying to boss you around. Maybe something like that would help assure them that you take your own safety very seriously too. How to communicate with these folks. This is a big, long list. And I want to make sure that we have some time at the end. But a lot of this revolves around developing your own awareness of what you're going through and how it's impacting you, so that you can know when you're feeling really down, and you can tell folks, you know what, I'm really feeling down today. And if you come over and try to cheer me up, that's not going to feel good to me today. But if you want to come over and, I don't know, eat a bunch of ice cream with me, then that would be great. Or watch a sad movie because I'm just in a sad mood today. Then that would be great. So just letting other people know what you're going through requires you to know what you're going through, and to be honest about it. Building on mutual love, trust, and knowledge of each other. The people that have been in your life, they've been in your life for as long as they've been in your life, and you know each other, and build on that. Trust them, trust that they love you, and that they can handle what you have to share with them. And if they can't handle it, then know that about them, and be okay with that, because hopefully you've got some friends who can handle it. Some people may not be able to. They're going to do their best, but this is one way, sort of stepping back from assuming that everybody should be able to sort of feel with you through everything that you're going is, it's going to cause, sorry, here we go, cause some resentment. Everybody's going to have their own feelings. And one thing I like to remind people is that feelings are not facts. So you can have a day where you feel like, the world is just a dismal, horrible place and it's not worth going on, and you stomp around your house and cry. And then the next day you feel like, oh gosh, yesterday sure was a bad day. I feel a lot better today. Just because we have these feelings does not mean that that is how we feel for all of eternity. It's how we feel in that moment. And allowing yourself to be in that space to mourn whatever losses, whatever thing that is making you feel so dark, acknowledging that's okay. You don't have to stay in that space. You don't have to hold on to that feeling. But I do think it's important to acknowledge the fact that you do have some of those feelings. Tears, crying is fine. I really I say this to people all the time. People call me and then they apologize about crying, and I just tell them it's my job to make people cry. So please don't feel bad about that. It's just a physical response. It's actually quite good for you. It has, we develop hormones in our body that are self-soothing when we cry. Also, know this knowing how much you and others want to know. Don't go on Dr. Google unless you really, it's always a bad idea when you get some new information. You go to Dr. Google, ask your doctors, and also just be really, really clear with your doctors or your PAs or whatever medical professionals that you're working with. Be really clear about how much information you want, and make sure that they're, giving you as much information as you feel comfortable asking them for. Let's see. I'm a big person, that knowledge is power. I think it's really, really important to be prepared for whatever eventualities might come. I really feel that preparing yourself is not the same as, making things happen. It's just preparing for possibilities. And that allows you to relax into the current moment, because then you don't have to worry about the what ifs. If the what ifs happen, then you're prepared. Planning ahead for tough moments. We can anticipate that certain parts of our life, or maybe certain cycles of your treatment, for example, may mean that you need to stay in the house, and other people may or may not understand that. So we might as well give yourself something to look forward to by acknowledging the fact that this hard part is coming up. You might be able to, get every last issue of Cosmo magazine and do all the quizzes for the next month, or a puzzle, or your favorite movies, or whatever it is. Give yourself things to look forward to, and, pretend it's a staycation, or whatever you need to do to keep your spirits up. But, just remember, just because you can't get out of the house doesn't mean that life isn't worth living. There's lots of fun things to do if you plan for it. Experiencing joy, laughing, anything that you can do to get yourself laughing. It is really tremendous medicine. Even though I'm not a doctor, I'm still going to say that. Asking for help, ask for help, ask for help, ask for help. We never want to ask for help. But when you don't ask for help, you also deprive other people of the opportunity to be there for you and with you. So it's actually not fair to not ask for help, because most of these people who aren't around, they really want to do something, you just have no idea what. So you're really doing them a favor by asking and letting them know what they can do. What else? Always, if you're feeling down, you're feeling blue, you're not feeling well, always talk to your medical providers, talk to your team, because sometimes these things are not grief. Sometimes it's something about the type of diagnosis that you have. For example, brain tumors can impact areas of the brain that control the emotions. So it might be, if you have a brain tumor, it might be something like that. It could be some of the treatment that you're going through. Certain treatment modalities are known for causing depression. So, don't try to take on all of this yourself. turn to your medical team, ask them, make sure that there aren't things that they can do to help you through either medication management or helping you understand that there might be some part of the disease process that's impacting your ability to cope. That it's not just that you are somehow deficient or unable to support yourself. It's not usually that. Talk to the people around you. I also always like to remind people, especially when your appetite is disturbed, the gut-brain connection. There is a direct line between your gut and your brain into your mood center. So anytime that your digestive system is off in any kind of way, it can also throw your mood off. So it's just another layer. It's not that eating a healthy diet will all of a sudden make the world, right as rain. It doesn't, but it can be a layer that can sort of, tip the balance. So just something to be aware of. Breathing. I know we talk about mindfulness and meditation and breathing. Breathing is actually more than all of that. It's also about getting oxygen to our extremities. If we are stressed out and anxious, oftentimes we clench our muscles. Clenching muscles pushes out the oxygen. Pushing out the oxygen makes us cranky and sore. So, thinking about getting oxygen and breath to all of the parts of our body is really, really important. And it's amazing how often we forget to breathe. And then, also seek some help if you need. Not everybody needs this, but if you're comfortable with it, counselors, therapists, social workers, the palliative team, these are all people who are there to help. So these are just some little self-care ideas. I like to remind people that self-care is not about self-improvement or about your treatment. It's about just, getting yourself to a place where you feel like you can breathe for a minute. So often we set these goals like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym every day and I'm going to work out for an hour every day and I'm going to lose 30 pounds and I'm going to be this new version of me. And that's not really self-care. That's actually a recipe for stress and disaster because it's very, very hard to meet those goals and standards. And you wind up just feeling like you failed. Can't even do self-care well. What's up? What's wrong with you? And it's really, self-care is really not about that. It is just about taking whatever moments that we have. It might be 30 seconds at a stoplight to just take 5 deep breaths, or playing a song, singing out loud, going around your house, just dancing and having fun, texting a friend you haven't seen in a long time, or saying, here's one thing you can ask your friends to do. Tell them to text you something funny every day and not expect a response. And tell them that that's what they can do to cheer you up. And maybe you'll respond, maybe you won't, but that's not a part of the deal. I know people are not always happy to talk about palliative services and hospice, but again, this is information. And I want to make sure that everybody knows the difference between palliative care and hospice care. Hospice care is is an end-of-life program, medical service that is managed by Medicare and requires a prognosis of 6 months or less. The palliative service is not that. People mix these up all the time, and maybe many of you know about this, but the palliative service does not, there's no terminal diagnosis required. You can be doing your treatment. It's a service for people with serious illness. So what they really specialize in is symptom management. And so it can be very, very helpful if you're having, if your symptom burden is really high. The palliative service, this is what they do. They know their pain treatment, they know their nausea treatment. And it's a consult service that you can ask for. It's an interdisciplinary team. They're also experts at starting to support the family as well as the patient. And I'm not, I certainly am not saying that anybody in this group is necessarily ready or needs to do that, but I just want to make sure that people know the difference between palliative and hospice because they really are not the same thing. And the palliative service can be tremendously helpful if you're really not feeling well, or if you have multiple complicated issues and you deal with a lot of different specialists. The palliative team, they tend to be really, really good at bringing together all of the medical disciplines to give you a more full picture of what's going on, because specialists oftentimes sort of only focus on the thing that they're good at. So just a consideration. And here's just a few resources for sort of additional, things in Pennsylvania. The Area Agency on Aging, they have a whole program for paying family members to be paid caregivers. So if you're kind of considering that as an option, that maybe you need some paid caregivers, that that it doesn't necessarily mean that the people in your life have to give up their financial their earnings. Support groups. Now, I don't have to tell any of you about this because you're all in one, which is great. There are programs for respite care. There's a place called Hope Rose that you can go and stay and be well taken care of. And it's just a time to sort of get away from your cares and concerns. Pennsylvania 211, they have all kinds of resources. Anything you want to know about resources in Pennsylvania, just dial 211 and they can tell you all kinds of stuff. AARP, and of course palliative service providers, and certainly also your medical team should be able to give you access to lots of different resources too, if you haven't thought to ask them yet. So I think that is mostly what I've got. Oh, it's family hospice. Sorry, I'll get that off of there. But Jen, if it's okay, I think we could open up for questions, concerns. Should I stop sharing?